Live from New York, this is the Ground Truth Podcast, your weekly dose of AI news and insights with Adam Wenchel and John Dickerson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of Ground Truth. We've got an action-packed agenda, as always, a busy week in the AI world. We'll start with talking about Amazon working on the next generation of Alexa, powered by LLMs, and their choice of foundation models might be considered a little surprising. We've got Ilya Sutskever, who is one of the AlphaGo authors and then a co-founder and chief scientist for OpenAI, who left under interesting conditions recently, has just raised money for Safe Superintelligence, raised $1 billion to potentially come out with another frontier model entrant. And so we'll talk about that. And then lastly, all the weirdness around antitrust, from more of these unusual fake M&A deals that are M&A that doesn't, not actually an acquisition. This latest one is arguably the leading robotics company. And then also this supposed subpoena that was denied for NVIDIA. And so lots going on in the world. So yeah, John, fun week ahead.
Fun week as always. Yeah, I'll kick it off with a discussion of new news for Amazon's Alexa. And so Alexa is one of these, probably the leading sort of physical tool that sits in, say, your kitchen or your bathroom or your garage, and you're able to talk to it, to order things, to ask for what the weather will be, to ask for your calendar, and so on. It's an assistant that really took off for a while, but has sort of floundered in recent years until an announcement that came out recently saying that Amazon will be powering their next generation of Alexa, not with their own family of foundation models, the Titan family of foundation models, but instead with Anthropic's Claude family of models. And this is interesting for a number of reasons. One is that Amazon does have a family of foundation models. I just mentioned them, these Titan models that famously aren't very, very good. People don't really use them, and it turns out maybe Amazon themselves aren't even using them for the Alexa upgrade that they're doing now as well, because the Claude models just appear to be better. And we've talked on about the Titan models a bit over the last few podcasts as well. And folks at Arthur actually earlier this year gave a very large webinar with folks from AWS in their Gen AI Center of Excellence that covered some of the Titan models as well. And even the Amazon folks are public about them not being the end-all be-all family of models. And so this association of Alexa with the Anthropic models is one of many steps that Amazon is taking to solidify their particular strategy when it comes to foundation models writ large. They have a product called Bedrock, which is sort of a platform that allows you to access many different models that are out there. You can access the Llama models that came from Meta. You can access Mistral's models, the French Starling that's putting together foundation models. You can access Anthropic's models. You can access the Stable Diffusion models from Stability AI, and so on. And this is an interesting decision on Amazon's part. They're one of the major players in tech, obviously, in the United States, alongside Google, alongside Microsoft, alongside NVIDIA, alongside Meta, and so on. And I think they're really etching out a particular place in that ecosystem when it comes to foundation models with that Bedrock product, with Alexa's commitment to Claude, and with other commitments that they're making to not just being their own, Titan-only shop.
Yeah, I agree. They definitely want to be seen as the ecosystem player. But I'm also curious how much of that is motivated by either A, not having the talent to really create one of these models, because it does take some very specialized knowledge, or B, just maybe a deliberate strategy decision that maybe the best thing is not to burn $1 billion in training up one of these frontier models right now, and maybe it's just best to keep the powder dry for a year or two while this see how it plays out.
Yeah, that's super rational, right? Especially with the speed at which these models and families of models are progressing, right? If you look at OpenAI and Anthropic, I would say arguably the two true leaders in this space right now. You could argue Google would be in there as well. It's expensive and it moves really quickly, right? And so to Adam's point, you could burn $1 billion, and then 6 months from now, you almost wasted that money, right? And so, I'm actually pretty bullish on Amazon's strategy here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It echoes, some of what's emanating from Apple, right, with Siri, and obviously having Sam Altman at their event, their last event, and announcing a major partnership with OpenAI. The details haven't been quite as forthcoming as to what exactly that entails, but Siri is one of the obvious plays there, and certainly I'm sure there must be work going on behind the scenes. So it'll be interesting we'll see how much, how many of the details leak out, but how much Apple decides to try to build that kind of capability in house, and how much they depend on OpenAI and others for it.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Siri, even more so than Alexa, has really floundered over the last few years. I mean, it feels like they haven't updated it at all. And so this is a huge, well, hopefully will be a huge step forward when more details are announced.
Yeah, you feel like it has to be, right? With all the technology that's advanced, it's like, how is this not gonna, how has this not gotten better? So hopefully soon our wait will be over. We'll see.
Yeah, it's like Siri. I'm an Android person, but many of my friends obviously are iPhone people. And when you handle Siri these days, it's truly terrible. It's like shockingly bad. And so about time, Apple.
No, totally. It's like outside of like a few scripted interactions, like send a text to John. It's not all that useful.
Cool.
Very
Well, yeah,
cool.
we're going to keep an eye on that, obviously. I do want to move along actually to a recent raise that happened. Adam mentioned this. So Ilya of OpenAI fame, and prior to that of Google Brain, where he worked a lot on like sequence learning, AlphaGo, and so on, left OpenAI under sort of mysterious circumstances with some of the drama over the last year or so, and has announced that he was founding a company called Safe Superintelligence, or SSI, a few months ago at this point, and then just in the last week announced that he had raised $1 billion, so 3 commas, $1 billion for that company. And so this is exciting because this signals that there is likely a new entrant into the frontier model training environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really fascinated by how this all plays out, because if you look at it, there's arguably, well, we can talk about this a little bit more in predictions, but right now there's probably 4, quote unquote startups. It's hard to call them startups when they have so many billions of dollars in funding, but that are 100% focused on building frontier models, and those are Anthropic, xAI, the Elon Musk backed entrant, OpenAI, and now Safe Superintelligence. And so those 4, plus you have the large incumbent tech companies like Google and Meta, or Google and Meta specifically, seem like the ones that are still involved in this, at the forefront of this arms race to build this next generation of AI. And it's not a game for the faint of heart, right? And we've seen a number of players like, I would argue like Mistral and Cohere that have extremely talented teams, but are not necessarily pushing the frontier as much as those 6 that we just mentioned. And so it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out over the next year, and who's going to keep all their chips, keep pushing chips into the middle of the table, and in this race for what I think all those players feel is a pretty like uniquely valuable prize in certainly the last 100 years of our history. So fascinating.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And it's also interesting in that, OpenAI and Anthropic are sort of 2 sides of a similar sword. They have different views of safety, and those views of safety have evolved over time. And in fact, their views on safety were much more aligned with Ilya's views early on, and then have shifted more toward maybe Sam Altman's views in that space in the last couple of years especially. And this is part of what triggered Ilya's departure. It's also part of what triggered other sort of major departures in the last few months, including John Schulman, who left specifically to do safety for Anthropic from OpenAI. And so this is another one of the OGs at OpenAI saying, hey, this doesn't align with what I want to do anymore. One of the co-founders actually of Ilya's startup, Safe Superintelligence, or SSI, also left for Anthropic actually a few months ago as well. And so, there is a lot of, if I were to, Ilya hasn't been super public about what safety means in terms of SSI at this point, but if I had to guess, it's going to be closer to Anthropic's views than OpenAI's views, just by the people who are involved in it. So, I'm sure we're going to see some attrition between all of these companies, and so, I'm curious if this pushes Anthropic in a particular direction, maybe more toward OpenAI, because SSI is probably going to be even more toward what I would say like extremist safety than Anthropic currently is. So that'll be interesting to watch over the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I was actually talking to the CIO of one of the largest private equity funds earlier today, and he was saying that, you and I, John, we pay very close attention, and we have actually, our team measures differences in the performance of models, so we're like very aware of how they all compare. But to an end user like the CIO, he was saying that, look, in the last few months, it's gotten to the point where the differences between the models, like they're all pretty much the same to me, because they're all incredible, they all perform extremely well. And I know there's some reports of OpenAI and others having sort of next generation models waiting in the wings. So maybe that'll change it. But at this particular moment in time, they're all very good. And to the average application builder or person who wants a co-pilot, not strikingly different. And so I wonder, is safety going to be the thing they differentiate on, or is there going to be, another wave of innovation around things like this advanced reasoning, the kind of strawberry Q star type of behavior? How do you think that plays out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm bullish on the reasoning stuff, and there's been tons of work, obviously, in like reinforcement learning and agent-based planning and so on over the decades. We've talked about this in past podcasts as well. I think we will see some advances there, but I think we're also going to see what we're already seeing, right, which is specialization, which is looking beyond the foundation models, even the frontier model companies, right, looking into the UI UX, looking into how you hook into particular verticals, how you actually measure the value that your particular model is. System models are providing to the end user and so on. So my guess is with these frontier models, we're going to see reasoning, we're going to see larger models, we're going to see increased capabilities. But to Adam's point, to the CIO's point that he was talking to earlier today, a lot of tasks now can be solved by a number that is greater than one of these frontier models, and at that point the value add isn't increasing the capability of the model, it's increasing usability, it's increasing hooking into business processes and that kind of stuff. And maybe this is a weak prediction, but I'm guessing all of these companies will see larger consulting arms sort of pop up where they actually build traditional engineering style building alongside the frontier models that their core teams are developing.
All right, that's a prediction I agree with.
For once. And then one last thing I want to bring up with the SSI, I hadn't actually realized this, but one of their investors, they have Sequoia, they have amazing investors, obviously, that's unsurprising, but Andreessen is one of the investors in this. And Andreessen, they've been fairly open, actually, about not wanting to commit to what I thought at least was ILIA-style safety or hamstringing models that, they want to build, they don't want any regulations, that kind of thing. And so I actually haven't looked yet, but, Andreessen obviously will put out a blog when it comes to this SSI investment. So I'm curious how they're going to right-size the investment in a company that, maybe goes against what they've been publicly talking about with a huge investment. And, obviously bullish on the team, incredible executors, bullish on Andreessen as well, incredible VCs. But that kind of opened my eyes when I saw them.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And just as an aside too, I don't know if you saw the news, but there's OpenAI is rumored to be raising another round as well, led by Thrive Capital, that would value them at over $100 billion, which is extraordinary. They're I think they're going to try to raise another couple $1 billion. So, it's just I feel like at this point it's just a game of poker where everyone's raising the ante and waiting for the other people to blink. It's really fun to watch.
Yeah, that's going to launch it. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, OpenAI, and this has been talked about a bit on X in the last week as well, is starting to run into the same issues actually that NVIDIA did, which is that employees that were hired in 4 or 5 years ago via secondaries, it's unclear how capped these secondaries are, but they're now easily in the tens of millions of dollars in net worth, and a lot of that is now no longer paper net worth, right? They've been able to sell into the secondaries, and so quietly it's been rumored that there's some core attrition just because people have a lot of money at this stage, the same sort of thing that NVIDIA has. And so having another raise like this, OpenAI tends to do secondaries alongside, with a valuation in the hundreds of billions is going to be good for those early employees, put it that way.
Yeah. Although, I mean, to our earlier conversation, they've lost the majority of the founders, and the founding team is largely gone. And I'm sure they're still attracting lots of new talent.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
Excellent. Well, should we, last topic for today, just the general weird world of antitrust right now in the U.S. We know that the U.S. government is doing a little more saber rattling around antitrust, and we'll see what amounts for. But one of the effects that we've talked about a little bit is these sort of pseudo acquisitions that seem to be happening. And there was another one announced on Friday by one of arguably the leading technology maker for next generation robotics that was, licensed by Amazon, and their founding team plus 25% of their engineers are now Amazon employees. So I don't know, John, if you want to
so
your take on that.
Amazon is an enormous logistics company, right? And they employ a huge number of humans as well as a huge number of robots. I mean, employ isn't the right word for that, but they have a very, very large sort of multi-agent systems in their warehouses that move stuff around, right? And so Covariant, which was the air quotes acquired company, co-founded by, amongst others, Peter Abbeel, who's one of the strongest professors. He's at Berkeley, but has been involved in a number of entrepreneurial pursuits over the years as well. They focus on building sort of what they call like a foundation model for robotics, but in Amazon's eyes, it's going to be a better way to pick and pack, right? So picking and packing are these two words that are used for, can I pick stuff out of boxes or from a conveyor belt and then pack it into other boxes that then go off into the world and land on your front doorstep. And humans do a lot of this. Famously, Amazon has tons of metrics that they track on humans. Well, I won't make statements about the ethics of some of this, but not all of it is very worker friendly, and the ability to reduce some of that overhead by introducing hardware that does this for you, it is huge. And so it's unsurprising to see a quote unquote acquisition like this. Amazon's made others over the years as well. So depending on how you view robotics, like Zoox, which does autonomous driving, this is some autonomous stuff that you might want to have in your warehouses as well. Kiva Systems, now well over 10 years ago, would build these little like fleets, if you can think of them as like little ants that will pick up boxes and move them around the warehouse automatically for you. And they recently tried to get iRobot, the Roomba maker, but that fell through a little bit earlier this year as well. And so, scooping up talent here in a way that isn't going to, well, I mean, we'll see if this actually attracts the FTC. But the FTC can't be dumb when it comes to like looking at these sorts of quote unquote acquisitions. But it's a good acquisition on Amazon's part for sure.
And this is at least the fourth one of these we've seen, right? Adept, Inflection, and
Character.
And what? Character, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this seems to be the wave, and they also announced it Friday evening, which is also like the I hope no one notices kind of time to announce things, which is interesting. But yeah, it's funny that the problems that Covariant's working on, you were talking about the picking and packing, it's one of the hardest problems in sort of AI and robotics, right? Because if you think about a human's ability to 1 second pick up an egg and another second to pick up a brick, and like the differences in how hard you have to squeeze and what would happen if you squeeze an egg like you squeeze a brick when you pick it up. And I know there's like this combination of grasp and suction and other techniques that they have to kind of seamlessly combine in order to get anywhere near human performance on those types of tasks. It's amazing.
Yeah, this grasping problem is so cool. If anyone ever wants to, burn 30 minutes of time, I'm sure there's some YouTube video on this. Look at the various types of graspers that are out there. Adam mentioned suction, but if you've seen like Baymax, right, which is this like big white balloon-like animated character in one of the recent movies that came out of the animation studios, this was actually motivated in part by a team actually from Carnegie Mellon that was dealing with like grasping and kinematics via like pressurizing a balloon effectively, or pressurizing like a large like blimp-like object. And a lot of that comes down to, like Adam was mentioning, if I want to pick something up, I also want to make sure that I am not destroying the thing I am picking up, right? That could be an egg, that could be shaking hands with somebody, for example. I would like to use my hand after doing that. And this has been a problem for decades at this point, and it still definitely is not solved. And I will say Covariant has made some huge strides in that space as well. They're not just software, they're also dealing with the hardware pretty intensely.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the takeaway here is when you meet your robot overlords, don't shake their hand.
Yeah, or give them your baby.
Awesome. And then also under the world of NVIDIA or of antitrust weirdness there is this report that got published that NVIDIA had received a subpoena from the DOJ for antitrust practices, as the DOJ kind of cranks up their scrutiny of potential anti-competitive behavior from NVIDIA. And that the day that this report was published, I think there were already some bear forces in the market, but NVIDIA lost $279 billion in market cap, which was the largest single day erasure of market cap in the history of the stock market, which is amazing. I mean, what did you, it's like 3x the market cap of Intel and as big as AMD in like a 1 day loss.
Yep, it's bigger than AMD and like 3x Intel, even after Intel popped, based on some rumors about spinning out one of their foundries. I will say Jensen Huang has nerves of steel. I am sure seeing his personal net worth shift around this much has got to be Well, sure, he's checking his phone at 9:30 every morning or 9 o'clock every morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're going to see more of this, right? Like, NVIDIA is obviously the big dog here. It has the eyes of the government on it, both for export control reasons as well as for, competitiveness within the U.S., so anti-monopoly, that kind of thing, reasons. And, it's an amazing company. Like Adam and I have said, we are huge fans of NVIDIA's hardware, of their software, of their team, of their leader, obviously. They have created an amazing enabler for technology that is truly changing humankind, but the government is going to do what the government's going to do. So I think we're going to see a lot more of these coming forward.
Yeah, I mean, the rumors are that with supply so far behind demand, that NVIDIA maybe uses that as a way. They put a lot of thought into who gets how many GPUs, because there's not enough to go around. And so if you're developing a competitive technology, say TPUs or something based on an ARM architecture or an AMD chip, maybe your allocation would not be as high. And so you have to take that into account. And is that anti-competitive? If someone's trying to compete with you, can you withhold some supply from them? I guess that's what Lina Khan and the DOJ will have to decide.
Yeah.
The kicker in all this is NVIDIA the next day issued a statement saying that they have in fact not received a subpoena from the DOJ, but although they are in talks with them. And the other funny thing is, in theory, you would expect that to maybe to see a boost in AMD's stock price if NVIDIA is being investigated, but that has not happened, I don't believe.
Yep.
Sadly.
Never investment advice, as always. Yeah. So with that, we can move it along to predictions. I know I have a couple. So one is, last podcast we talked about SB 1047. This is that bill that made it through. Well, it's now sitting on the governor's desk in California. This is the quote-unquote AI kill switch bill, and I predicted that this will pass, that it will be signed. I am maintaining that prediction. Maybe that'll happen this week.
We'll see. No reason. I'll buy it. Prediction that I'm interested in, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the episode, is who's still going to be, like, as the stakes get higher and higher in this race to build the frontier models, who's still going to be around in a year, right? Who's going to keep raising the billions of dollars needed to stay at the forefront of this? So we know, I think OpenAI will certainly be there. When you look at the rest of the pack with Anthropic, xAI, and now Safe Superintelligence, as well as the Metas and the Googles of the world, there's there's a lot of while right now it feels like they're all pretty similar in terms of their performance. There's a lot of rumors about sort of the next generation being an order of magnitude more powerful in their ability to reason and things like that. And so and there's also a lot of whispers about how much that costs to build a model that's capable of this next level of reasoning. And so, yeah, John, a year from now, is it still the same? Four kind of single purpose companies and the two the two incumbents in Google and Meta, or do you see that mix changing at all over the next year? Anyone's going to drop out or blink?
I have two responses here. One is, I would have guessed that there would not be this much money flowing into AI a year ago, and so I'm going to say the same thing, which is, like, there's kind of a finite amount of money, right? There's not an infinite amount of money that can flow into these companies, and so at some point that faucet's got to get turned off for frontier models. I could see, Covariant's pitch here is an interesting one as well, with this frontier model foundation model for robotics. Maybe we're going to see a frontier model company specifically for, like, medical breakthroughs, or like in the AI for science space. And so I don't know if you want to call it a competitor to OpenAI. And I know OpenAI obviously has their own healthcare team. Anthropic has a team focusing on this as well. But we might see a well-capitalized, Pfizer puts a bunch of money into this. The government puts a bunch of money into this. A lot of rich folks put a bunch of money into this, like frontier model for drug design or something like that.
Interesting. So you think it's going to go more towards specialized models? You're going to see more specialized frontier models.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about just a super, super hyper specific specialization, but specialization in the medical space or in the drug design space, right? And these are enormous, enormous markets because there's a ton of money in them already. But yeah, would you want to use GPT-5 for drug design, or would you want to use potentially a better model, a smaller model, or specifically trained or more trustworthy or whatever model to do drug design? Probably the latter.
Well, it seems far-fetched now. I have to say, over a year ago, there were a lot of very smart people predicting the rise of these sort of specialized models, and really, if we're being honest, the innovations come in the general purpose models, and I think there's even been we've seen people like Adept dropping out of the specialized model kind of race and going to adopting general purpose models.
Yeah. I will counter that lightly with, in a space like drug design or a space like medical, healthcare, etc., a lot of the data to train these models is probably private, and so probably is not in an OpenAI's model or an Anthropic's model. Now, they could get into that by writing deals with Epic Healthcare or whatever. Unclear if they're going to see the value add there to make that kind of deal, or if some other startup can come in and focus specifically on that. But yeah, I do agree with you. And I mean, I've been somebody who's been a big proponent of these smaller models as well. And then it just turns out that like GPT-4o is pretty freaking good.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a prediction that I would like to end on then.
Right.
We talked about Ilya's SSI, the safety focused frontier model company that just raised $1 billion, and Anthropic, which also has a similar-ish view on safety. I wouldn't bet my life on this, but let's say within 5 years, those two merge or one is acquired by the other.
Yeah. The merger one makes a lot of sense. They do seem philosophically similar. I wonder, there must have been conversations about Ilya joining Anthropic, and I wonder what kept that from happening. We'll see. That's going to be interesting to watch it unfold.
Yeah. We'll see more information coming out on, what Ilya's views on safety are and SSI's views on safety are in the coming months. So, keep an eye out for that.
Excellent. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for tuning in to episode 5. We'll be back next week with more Ground Truth goodness. Thanks.